The great aim of education is not knowledge but action. Hello and a very good evening to everyone present here. I am Pranay Surya Rao, Management Chief at Rait Acm. Along with me, I have Anushka Gupta, Creative Chief at Rait Acm. We would like to welcome you all to day 5 of Ready to React, a 5-day live workshop organized by Rait Acm, where you would be taken through an amazing journey of JavaScript, the language that gives web pages interactive elements and make everything even more attractive. We are glad to have all of you here on a last day of Ready to React. JavaScript language will enable you to build websites from scratch, a pretty useful skill to have in today's world. I hope the past 4 days were lucrative to you. We have uploaded the recording on our YouTube channel. Though you were beginner in JavaScript, I hope you got to learn much from our speaker. We will also be providing certificates from the workshop. Participants feel free to ask your questions to the mentor. You can also post your query in a text channel. All questions of every participant will be answered during the workshop by our mentor. We will be asking a Q&A session at the end of the day.
Today, our speaker, Mr. Hari Darshan, will take you to different concepts of JavaScript. He is a full stack developer and has completed numerous internships on React. He is currently working as a product engineer intern at TLC. Mr. Hari Darshan is also the winner of Equal to Perfection organized by RAIT Before we proceed with the session, let's have a small recap of the topics we covered yesterday. Object destructing, difference between null and undefined, arrays and looping through it, array of objects, higher order functions, map, filter, arrow functions, and higher order functions with arrow functions. So now let's begin with today's session. Over to you, sir.
I'll just present my screen now. Okay, so I hope my screen is visible. So we learned about some higher order functions related to arrays, and we had one left to cover, which is reduce. So let's start with that only. So we have array, same array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we want to learn about a higher order function on arrays, which is reduce. So we have array.reduce, and as you know, this is a higher order function. This would take a parameter, which is another function, and for that we'll have to create that function. So let's call that function as add me or something. Okay, so that's going to take two parameters. One is the previous value. Okay, so one is the previous value, one is the current value. You can also call this like you can name them anything, whatever you want, but just to make it more sensible, we can have we should have more sensible variable names. Now, what this does is takes it basically returns previous value plus current value. Yeah, so that's the function add me. So if you call this function with two parameters, 3, that is going to return you something 2 plus 3, which is 5. Okay, so how do we use this in our reduce function? So what reduce does is it's going to traverse through all the elements of this array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 one at a time, and it will have two variables. One would be and it would call this add me function, but it would pass two variables to this add me functions. Add me function, which is previous value and current value. So this previous value is actually the value which is accumulated till now. Okay, I'll explain you what I mean by this. So basically here, or let's rename this to accumulated value. That would be better. So accumulated value, and returns accumulated value plus current value. So it's basically going to call this function again and again, and it's going to pass accumulated value with the current value. And what we do, we add the accumulated value and current value and return the sum. So this thing which is returned, this would become the first parameter, or this would become the accumulated value for the next iteration. So for example, for the first iteration, we have 1 here. It would take 1 and there's no accumulated value till now, so it is going to take 0. You can also pass any other additional value if you want, but that's optional. So, and then it would add 0 plus 1 and this would become 1. But in the next iteration, when it goes to 2, this accumulated value would be 1 because that is what was returned in the previous iteration. And the current value is 2. It would add those and return that. Then this accumulated value for the next iteration would become 3. So basically we are calculating the sum of all these numbers. Okay, so let's test that. I'll have passed add me, and this is going to return me one single value, which is the final accumulated value. Okay, so this is going to return me the final accumulated value. Now if we look at the console, I'll remove this. This is the future. We'll see that it returns 15. Okay, so this basically returns 15 and we know how this returns 15. Okay, now there is one optional parameter that you can pass, that what should be the accumulated value in the start. So if I say it's 5, so this is going to start with 5 and then it would do 5 plus 1, which will return 6, and then accumulated value becomes 6, 6 plus 2, 8, then accumulated value becomes 8, and 8 plus 3 would be 11, and 11 plus 4, 15, 15 plus 5, 20. So this would eventually return 20, and this should be passed in this function, array.reduce function. So along with this function, you are also passing 5, and this complete thing is returning a value. So it returns 20, and previously I had passed it to the console.log function, hence it was printing 5 and 15 differently, but now we can do this. Okay, so just to not confuse us, we'll create a variable. Let's say this is sum. Okay, and we'll console.log sum so that things are more clear to us. Okay, so we have this let sum is equal to array.reduce add me and 5, and we console.log sum. Now this is going to return us 20. Okay, now there's one thing, that can we make this function anonymous, because we are only using this function for one purpose, that is passing it into reduce. So why not make it anonymous? So to make it anonymous, I'll just remove the name, and instead of this calling this function by name, I'll pass this function exactly as it is. So we have this function, here, and then another parameter is 5. This should return us 20, and it does return us 20. So if I remove 5 from here, then the starting point would be 0, and hence it would return us 15, which is working fine. Now we have made this anonymous, but we also know that there's one more thing that we can do, and that is we can make this an arrow function. So I removed that keyword which was arrow function and replaced and placed an arrow here. Now it returns 15, which is fine, but we know the property of arrow function, that if there's only one return statement, like we only have one return statement in a function, but basically if the return statement is simple enough to be represented in a single line, then we can do that without using the curly braces too. And we don't need this return thing, because this on its own would mean that this is accumulated value, current value, and accumulated value plus current value. So if I save this, it still returns the same thing. So let's say this A and let's say this C, so that it fits over the screen for now, but we should give sensible names. Okay, so this would just give us the sum. If we try to remember, previously in the third session, we did all these things using that for loop thing. So we had to declare a sum variable and all the stuff, and then we would get this sum. So this can also be done for to get the product, so which is a into c, but now this should another parameter, which is 1, should be passed here, or else it would be like multiplied by 0 again and again, and we'll get something else. So we get the factorial of 5, which is fine. Okay, so this is how the reduce function basically works. This is how we reduce our code by using arrow functions, like first anonymous functions and then arrow functions. Okay, so now we have learned few of the higher order functions for arrays. So now I have this data, which is people info. Okay, and this is an array of objects. So let's see some examples, like how we can use this higher order functions to do stuff conveniently. So let's say we have few questions here. Okay, so you want to return the names of all the people. So you have to return the names of all the people, or basically you have to collect the names of all the people. Another question is, once you have collected the name of people, I want you to filter, basically collect the name of people starting with A. Okay, let's say, I hope, okay, all are starting with A. So what else? Let's say collect the name of all people who are having age less than 19. Okay, having age less than 19. So we want to do such operations. Okay, and the first very question would be like print the names of all people. Okay. So let's solve the first one. The first one is very easy. Now there are, like, this can be done in many ways using for loop, while loops and stuff, but we try to focus on using higher order functions of arrays only. So let's do that using higher order functions. So we'll create a function. Make sure you spell function right. So we'll create a function which says print names, takes a name, and it would just do console.log name. Okay, so now I'll use that people info array, which is defined here. There's people info array. We have this people info array, and we say people info dot for each. This is what we use to traverse. Okay, and I can say print names, and this would like pass all the elements of the array one by one. But in this case, this won't work because this is expecting just the name, but we are passing an object. Okay, so let's say instead of passing object, we pass person, something like we name this variable as person, and I want to print not the complete person, but just the name of the person. So person dot name. Cool enough? Okay, so now this is all we need. If we go to the console, you'll see that all the names of the person, like we have 10 people and all the names are printed. So that's fine, but we can make it like anonymous, right? So why not make it anonymous? So I'll just remove the name, cut it and paste it here, and then we have this anonymous function which does exactly the same thing. Okay, I'll save the script, and which does exactly the same thing. Okay, now this can also be converted into an arrow function. So let's convert it into an arrow function. Then again, we have only one return statement, so we can basically just have this. And this would return us the same result. And we are done. Okay. So this is our first question, print the names of all the people, and we did print the names of all the people. Now another question is, okay, collect the names of all the people. So we have printed these names, but maybe we want to collect this name. Maybe we want to make a new list of names or do something with that. So for that, let's say let new list. So I basically declare a new variable, and that variable is people info dot map. That's people info dot map. Okay, and we know that map is going to take a function because it's an arrow function. So you can just simply say function and then names. It's going to take the person object and it's going to return person dot name. So that's it. And we pass this in the people.info thing. So now we have a new list, and if I console.log new list, I'll comment this out. Okay, and if we console.log new list here, you'll see that out of all the objects, we just have the names. Okay, so let's have a look like what it was, like what it would print if I passed people info. So this is people info, which is basically an array of objects, but we only want the name, so we had the names. Okay, so that's our like second question. We wanted to collect the names, just the names out of all the details, and we did it. Now again, this can be made anonymous function. So let's make it an anonymous function. As you might have already guessed, we can also make this an arrow function. So we made this an arrow function, and since it is returning, like the return statement can be written in a single line, we don't even need the curly braces, and we don't even need this return statement. So new list people info dot map person dot name. So it takes a person and returns person dot name. So in a single line, we just got all the names, and that's good, right? Now the other thing is, like, we have to collect the names of the people who are having age less than 19. Okay, so I guess we can use filter here. So let's create a new list, another list, and then we pass in what people info dot filter, and this is also going to take another function, but in this case I'll write the anonymous function directly here. So we wrote a function. This is going to take the person object, and there's one more optional parameter, that's the index, but we don't have any condition based on the index, so that's not required. So if the person dot age is less than 19, we want to return true. Okay. So if this is less than 19, we can return it true. Else, or there's no need of else, we can return this false. Okay. So if person.age is less than 19, return true, or else false. So if I print another list, console.log another list, you'll see that it just prints 4 of them, which is 18, 17, but we wanted just the names, right? We just wanted the names. I'll comment it out. So we just wanted the names. So again, we can use this exact function here. Let's say we use this exact function, but instead of using people info, I say this is another list, okay, and we print new list. So first we filter them out, then we print it using map, and it is like simply the names of 4 people whose age is less than 19. Now this can be also done within a single line. So what we can do is we have this people info dot filter, and this is going to return an array, and we can chain this map function to this. Okay, so this is doing filter, and then it's returning the name of the person, and that is all stored in another list. So we can just print another list to check it out. If I print another list, you'll see that it still gives us the expected answer, right? So now we can also do this in one more way. Like in map, you have an option whether you want to consider things or not. So you can just remove this filter completely and just say that this is a map, and if the person.age is less than 19, return person.age, or else return nothing. So if I save it, print another list, sorry, we don't have to print person.age, we have to print person.name. Okay, but yeah, it creates a problem. And why this creates a problem? Because you always have to return one or the other thing out of this map, and if you don't return anything, then by the memory creation phase, the return state, like basically the returning variable, would be addressed as undefined. So that's why this can't be used. But you can do one more thing, that is basically filter. First you map, then you can filter. Even that is possible. And you take the name, and then you can, if the name equals undefined, if the name equals undefined, you have to return false. So like, don't consider those names, or else return true. Okay, so that would just give us the result. But we can also do this in one more way, which is basically saying type of name is equal to undefined, but then we would have to put undefined in a string, because type of returns a string. This gave us the same result. Now if you remember, I had told you something, that we just want to return true or false, right? In case of filter. So maybe I can just return true or false in a single line. So if I say, what I'll return is name equals undefined, or name not equals undefined. What this will do, it will take name, it will compare the name. So if the name is not equal to undefined, this statement would become true, right? This statement would become true, and hence that thing would be kept in the array. If it's equal to undefined, then this would become false. Name not equal to undefined would become false, and that would be discarded on its own. So if you check it out, you'll see that we get the desired result. Now, if you remember one more thing, I talked about truthy and falsy values, and undefined is basically a falsy values. So if basically you have name and you return name, or just to be safe, if you return boolean of name, so if it is undefined, it would return you false, and hence it won't be considered. If you return the name, if it's a string, then it would return you true, and hence that would be considered. So this is giving us the same thing. So till this point, I guess, like, I hope everybody understood what we have done so far. So this is basically implementation of the things that we have learned. Now name equals gives name. So I had done the type conversion on my own, but as we know that for comparison and stuff, JavaScript uh, does type conversion on its own. Like it can basically convert things if it needs to. So if you just pass name equals name, if it's undefined, it would be converted into false and hence discarded. If it's a string, then it would be true and hence considered. So this is another way. So first we did one way which was map and which was filter and then map, and now this is map and then filter. Okay, I hope you get it. So we have like answered these three questions. Okay. Now let's say we are going to learn a new topic which is promises. So in JavaScript we have a concept called promises. So let's say that you are executing a function, like, or you are executing a program, and your program needs some input. Your program needs some input from some other source. Now you are sure that this is the speed of your source. This is or basically this is the speed of your machine, your local machine where you are running your JavaScript program. But you don't know that what is the speed of the source which you are calling, which you are basically calling for the resources. For example, if let's say I want to call a server for some names, for some names or some random user names, then I don't know that how much time will the server take to respond back with the names. And hence at this moment, like in such scenarios, we use promises. So what promises does is, like, it's not going to return you the data right away. It's going to return you a promise which would be either resolved in the future or rejected in the future. Okay, so it's going to return you a promise. And then you can use that promise to wait for that promise to get resolved or rejected, or another option is you can write another function that whenever this thing happens, or whenever this promise is resolved or rejected, please run this function. Okay, so that's promises. One example is the fetch API. So what is the fetch API? The fetch API is basically used to fetch some data. So the fetch API is basically used to fetch some data, and we use this fetch API to fetch some data from a server. You can also fetch data from your local storage, but it's very limited, and at the same time it's very limited, and at the same time it's also restricted because you won't allow your program, basically your browser, to access all the parts of your computer, or it's a vulnerability, right? So we have a fetch API which is just going to fetch some data from somewhere. Like in our case, we are fetching some data from API, which is basically like application programming interface written on a server. Okay, so this is going to return me some data. So if I run this right away, you'll see that in the console I have this promise thing. Okay, you'll see that in the console I have this promise thing. So basically it didn't return me any data. It basically returned me a promise, and that would eventually be resolved or eventually be rejected. So by resolve means successful. By resolve I mean successful completion. By rejected means something wrong happened or something, hence there was not a successful completion. Okay, so this is going to return me a promise. So let's say I want to fetch some data. First, I'll show you that what this actually returns. So this is a random user.me/API, and you can just go to Google and you will see that this is you'll see that if you go to this URL which I mentioned here, it returns something like a lot of data. It returns a lot of data. So this data is in JSON format. Okay, so this data is in JSON format. So to like send data from one PC to another PC, or send data from like a server to front end, a back end to front end, or just for the sake of sending data, we use some notations, or we use some kind of structure to store that data, and so that it would be like interpreted perfectly by the programming languages that we use. So one of the uh, notations is JSON, which is JavaScript object notation. So it is going to have a structure which is similar to this response. So if you, I'll just zoom a bit. So if you have a look, this is basically an object kind of thing. And then we have like few arrays, and then inside an arrays, we have arrays of, we have an array of object, and we have like a lot of properties and stuff here. And that looks very similar to what we have like seen here. Okay, this is an array of object, it is having some properties and stuff. So you can say that it's very much similar to like JavaScript objects, and hence the name JavaScript object notation. Okay, so I want to get this data, and I want to do some stuff with this data. Okay, so if I do console.log fetch random user.me API slash this URL, whatever this URL is, I get a promise. So like, how do I know when this promise is resolved and stuff? So for that, we have one syntax, that is like you can fetch the resource that you want to get the data from. So let's say I do control C over here. So I'm going to fetch this resource, and I'll say that whenever this is done, after that, whenever this is done, then it will take a parameter, which is this fetch. Once it's done, it is going to return some data. It's going to return something. Let's say that it's nothing but a response. Let's say it's nothing but a response. So this dot then actually takes a callback. And what's a callback? Callback is basically a function which you define, and you want that function to run whenever this thing happens. Okay, so you can like write a function. Okay, and you can just say resolving function something. Okay, and it's going to take a parameter. Let's call it response. It's going to take a parameter, and you want to console.log this response, and then inside this dot, then I'll pass response. Okay, I'll pass I'll pass this resolving function which I defined here. Now if I go to the console, you'll see it gave me a response. It gave me a lot of things here, like a response. It's called a response object. Okay, so okay, I'll comment this out so that we don't get that first line. So if I refresh, you'll see that it takes a bit of time, and then suddenly it gets resolved and returns me a lot of things. Okay, but I just want the JSON, right? So I'll take this response and convert it into JSON. So how do I convert it into JSON? Like before that, let's create this, make this an anonymous function, which we can do. And also we can make this arrow function too. So I'll just make this an arrow function. So from now on, I will just try to write in the arrow function syntax directly. We don't need the parentheses if there's only one parameter here. So we have like this response, and I know that if I do console.log response, then I'm going to get that response object that I just saw. But I want the JSON part of it, right? I basically want this thing which I see in my browser, so that I can use that data for some purpose. So for that we have a function response.json. For that we have a function response.json, and if I console.log this response.json, I'll just format it so that it looks a bit better. So now it is going to return console.log response.json. I save it, I go to my document thing, it says it's a promise. Okay, so this response.json is also a promise. So what can I do now? So basically we had a fetch, that fetch returned a promise, and then we wrote a dot then which would resolve that promise and do some stuff. But then we came to know that response.json is also a promise. So again, I'll chain a dot then after it, and let's say we have another function inside it. I'm directly writing it as a arrow function. Also I can format it if you want, like format it if you want to. Okay, so I'm basically chaining the dot then thing, and I'm writing a function here which is an arrow function which takes the data, and it will do console.log data. Okay. Now I save it. So okay, this returned me an promise, and then I wrote another function inside the dot then so that it would be resolved. Now if I go to this console, you'll see that now I have this data. If you have a closer look to it, it's exactly what we wanted, the results, right? So now we can do some stuff with it. So we basically console.logged it. So basically printed it in our console. So you can see that it's a lot of data here. We have ID, the date of birth and age and stuff. So you can do a lot of things with this. So I guess the first thing which I would like to do is just get the name of the person and print that name. So it is Mr. Oken Idol. Okay. So I want to print it. I want to print that thing. Okay. So we have results, which is going to have an array of 20 objects, and every object is going to have these properties. So what I'll do, that I know that I have this data. I know that I have this data. Okay. And let's create a, like maybe you can create a separate function or you can write it here itself. So, okay, what I'll do, I'll create another function. So I basically say create another function which is handle data. Okay. And I create this function handle data. We are going to do all our operations with data here. So this is obviously going to give us the data, which would be like passed here. So if I console.log data here, I'm going to get the exact result that we got previously. So you'll see we have this thing. So if we refresh it, you will see that it takes a bit of time and then it returns us the result, because when this is resolved, it returns me this result. Okay. Now console.log data, this is not useful for us. So instead of that, we do data.results. That was the array we had in this data.results, and this was the array of 20 people. Okay. So if you have a closer look to one object, you will see that there's a name object inside that object. So results. So this is data.results, and if I like type 0, which is basically the first result here, which is at 0, the first result, and I want to access the name dot name, and if I console.log this thing, I only console.log, you'll see it just returns. Now, yeah, whenever I refresh, it's going to return a new set of data. Hence, like it would change, but that's not our problem, right? We always we have a predefined structure, which is first name, last name, and title. So what I want to console.log is not just the name, but I want to console the title first, then the first name, then the last name, and all should be like concatenated in a string. So I'll say name dot title, plus, then I'll add a space here, then the exact same thing, and I'll replace the title, with first. Okay, let's omit the last name. We just want the title and the first name. Okay, so it's Mrs. Veera. And if I refresh, it takes a bit of time, and then okay. Now this is for one object, but we have like an array of 20 people. So instead, we want to do something else. So let's do this. Like we'll take let, okay, and we will generate that array, people array. We'll say that let people array is equal to data dot results. So what this will do is it will create an array, people array, where we have this data dot results, everything. But we want the array to only have the title and the first name of the people, and it should do this for every person. So here we can use map, like data.results.map. And what map will do, it will take that object, take that person object. I'll say this is person object, and I want it to return uh, the name of that person along with the title and the first name combined. So I'll take the person object and I'll say person object. So if let's have a look at the person object first. Okay, so if I console.log this person object, so I don't have to console.log this because this would be like already stored in this array, but we just want to inspect it, and so I can do the console.log. So you'll see that we have 20 people, and for every object we have this, for every person object, or for every person we have this object. So in the person object we have this name object, which is the sub object for that. So what we want to return is person object dot name dot title, person object dot name dot title plus person object dot name dot first. Okay, I also want a space here, so I'll just add a space. So for every object, this is going to return this thing for us. And now if I log this array, which is console.log person array, sorry, people array, so we'll see that we have an array, and that array consists of the title and the first name of people. Okay, so this is what we have, and this is basically how you can deal with data. You can do a lot of stuff with this. Now we have this syntax, which is fetch dot then dot then. There's one more way to do this, and that is using the async await thing. So this was introduced in again ES6, which is ECMA script on 15. Better and a cleaner syntax to do all this stuff. Okay, so what I have to do is, let's say I have this let thing, okay, and I take the response here. I'll take response. I'll comment all this out. So we have this let response, and this is equal to await. Now this is not completely correct, but just have a look for now. And then we want to like fetch something. So basically this exact thing. So I'll say fetch this, and then console.log I have this, I save this, and then if I go to this, it says await is only valid in async functions. Okay, so basically when I use this await, it gave me this error which says await is only valid in async functions. So as I already told you that this is the wrong code, because for this, like if you want to access await, you always need to have an async function. How do you define an async function? So async function is basically the same function, but it is asynchronous. Like it actually knows that we are going to do some task where we are going to get some promise from any other source or something. Okay, so if you have to declare a async function, you just write this async in front of this function, and that's it. And then everything else is same. So async function, and I'll say this is nothing but get data. Async function get data, and then I place this here, and I do console.log, not fetch, but console.log response, and call get data obviously, or else we won't see anything. And I call get data. If I see the console, it returns me the response thing, and we wanted this to return like a JSON, and for that in this case what we did is we wrote response.json here, but we already know that this, if we use this response.json thing, this is going to be another promise. So in this case, instead of chaining a then here, I'm going to say await response.json. Okay, I'm just going to say await response.json. So do this task, and this is going to basically return me a promise, and I'll wait until this promise is resolved or rejected, and when it is resolved or rejected, we'll get this data here. Like if it's resolved, then we will get an error. If it's not, if it's resolved, we'll get the data, and if it is rejected, we get an error. Okay, so in our case, let's assume that this is going to resolve, because it will in most of the cases. So it resolves, and we get the data inside the data. And now if I do console.log, see that we get the desired result that we want. Okay, now again, you can, after that, we have this handle data thing. You can basically use this exact code here, because after that, everything else is like same. Now it depends from person to person. Few people like this syntax better because they can crisply see that what is happening, where I'm awaiting and stuff. And few people like this dot then thing because like it looks more cool or whatever. Like it's completely opinionated, but both are like good to go. And if I do people that array, it's going to do exact same thing, which is get the data, check the results, and then return you the title and the first name here. So that's how we have done it. Now, there was one more thing which I guess uh, I didn't cover yesterday. That was object destructuring. Object destructuring. Okay, object destructuring. Wait, I'll just be back. Okay, so we're going to check what is object destructuring. Okay, so in this example, we have this person object. It says that the person object dot name dot title and stuff. Now let's say that this is returning this. That is equivalent. If you have put curly braces, you have to put return here. So this is going to return the exact same thing. If you run it, you get the exact same thing. And but let's say that I want to first store the name and the title in some like basically I want to get the name object and store it in some object, another object, and then display everything. So how I can do this? I can do this like using let value equals to person object dot name. Okay, we can do this, and then we can maybe then instead of writing person dot name everywhere, I'll just write this value, and here also replacing person dot name, I'll write value. If I save, this is going to return me the exact same thing. Okay, so there's one more way to do this, and that is using object restructuring. For example, if you already know that this is the property inside that object, like if you already know the property inside that object, like in this case, we have name as the property. So I can directly write, so inside these curly braces, and then just remove this person.name here. So I have this object, and I say that, okay, I just want this name out of this object if it exists. And basically we do this when we know that it obviously exists. So now I can say this is like name.title, and this is name.first. And if you get the results, this is going to say like return the same thing. This is called object destructuring. So basically, if you already know the properties, you can already write it as a you can already write all those properties inside this curly braces, and it would be like interpreted with that. So your name would like this would interpret it as if you were storing name variable with person.name. Okay, so that's called object destructuring. One more thing which we can see here. Okay, I'll just cover this down here. So we had that array of 1 2 3 4 5. I'll just use this. Okay, I'll just use this array here. So there's one thing called as spread operator. Okay, so you can use that spread operator to create a new copy of object from a given object. Let's say I create a new object or a new array, and arrays are also objects in JavaScript. And if I want to like give this exact same thing again, there are two ways, like 2 to 3 ways basically. So one way would be like use for loop and then go on push the stuff. One way would be do array.map and return the exact element again. So now this one is simpler, so we can implement that too. So element, this is going to return the element as it is, and I'll do console.log element. Okay, sorry, console.log array of 2, because that's the array I generated. So wait a minute. So it says identifier array 2 has been already declared. So maybe we declared array 2. We can't declare array 2 again in the same. We can't declare array 2 in the same scope. Just a quick question. If this was var, like not this was var, let's say that in both the places where we have this array 2, which is at line number 354 and line number 493. If in both the places we had var, would this give us an error or not? Yes or no would be fine. Would this give us an error or not? So okay, this is the first question for this session. Anyways, now if it was var here, if let's say it is var here, okay, and here also this is var. Here 1 2 3. Here also this is var. So will that give an error or will that work fine? Okay, and so few people say that it won't give an error, and absolutely right. This is one of the disadvantages of var, because like you end up declaring same variable with the same name again and again. So okay, one more quick question. Let's say I uh, at this place I replace it with let. Okay, now will this give me an error or not? Like, will this give me an error or not? I replaced the above one with this, so whether this is going to give me an error or not. So yeah, few people say yes, and you're right, this is going to give an error. So this is because let is like more stricter than var, and also whenever you have let, uh, in some cases there is shadowing, which is a important concept to learn. You can basically Google it up, because this is however the last session and we don't really have much time to get over that topic. So for time being, let's just remove this completely. Okay. Uh, so but I recommend you that you search about shadowing, and you'll get to learn a very important topic. So if I now console.log array2, it is going to return me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. There's one more cool thing. Okay. I told JavaScript will execute line by line, right? So this is line number 491, and this is function array. I'm not sure this is whether this would be like the okay, cool. So I told that this would execute like line by line. So hence the get data should execute first, and then we will execute this line number 497. But if you check here, so it actually says something else. So like maybe in some cases it could be like on the first line itself, but in this case it's not, and we know, like I hope you know why this is happening, because this is basically an async function. So this is like we assume, or we know that this is going to take some time to fetch the data. Until that time it's going to give me a promise object, and it will continue the execution, and once that is done, then we get this, and whenever we get this result, I'm going to console.log people array. Okay, for now I'm just commenting it, and we console.log array of 2. So our question was like we have to create a exact array. So we did this using map, we can do this using for loop and stuff, or else uh, the best way would be like, let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But if this is very big array, then what will you do? If I just pass array, then it would become an array of array, which we don't want. So here comes one, like we have one syntax available for this, which is basically called spread operator. So if I like pass the, or if I basically write ellipsis before an object on an array, object or an array, then that is going to spread this complete thing here. So you can assume that this completely is replaced by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like this is basically spread. Uh, the array is basically spread at this line 493, and hence if you see the console, you'll see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So with that, we have like covered the today's topic, and more or less we've covered a lot of things. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me. I'll just wait for a minute or two. If we have any doubt, you can continue, or else we'll hand over it to Krishna Dake, because Rait Acm is having a very important announcement. So just stay tuned, like stay tuned for that. If you have any questions, you can ask. If you have any questions, you can ask till that time. I'll just check this list. Okay, you can ask me questions if you have reduce. So if you have any questions, you can. So I guess there are no questions. Voice was breaking in between that. Could you please do the fetch part again? Okay. So which part do you want me to cover? The async await part or the uh, dot then syntax part? Which one do you want me to cover? Okay, we have this async await part and we have this dot then syntax part. So which one do you want me to cover? Async await. Okay, cool. So what we did in async await was like, I'll just go back to in time, not in time, but in my code at least. Okay, so we were at this point where like let response is equal to await fetch. But when we ran this code and checked our document, it said like, okay, this is given an error because await can only be used inside an async function. So for that purpose, what we did, we created a function. Okay, we created a function and let's say this is some function get data. Okay, so this is some function get data and we want this to be like an async function. So we have to specify that by writing this async keyword and then pass this thing inside here. And then again, console.log should be passed here. So if I now check it, okay, here console.log fetch. Instead of that, we'll replace it by response. And if we check it, refresh it and check it, nothing happens. Okay, nothing happens because we are not calling the function. Okay, so make sure you call the function. So when we call this function, we have this response object here, but we want that JSON part of it. So we basically run response.json, but we know that this response.json is going to return us as like it's going to eventually return us the data, but first it would return us a promise, and then when that promise is resolved, we will get that data. So if I want to store that variable, like if we want to store that data in a variable, then I'm declaring a variable and at the same time assigning it to response.json. But we know that this response.json is going to return me a promise. Hence, I write a await statement here, which basically says that wait until this is resolved or rejected, and once that is resolved or rejected, then return me that stuff. So once this is resolved, we get this. Okay. Now, what I basically did here was I created an array where I just wrote the title and first name of the person as a string, and I consoled that array. So like till this point, like line number 480, we are definitely going to have this data because we are using this await statements. So in line number 478, it says that since this fetch returns and promise, the await statement will indicate, like await keyword will indicate that wait until this is resolved or rejected, and once it is resolved, then store the value in response. Then we do response.json because this was returning us the response object, but we want the JSON part of it. And this is also an synchronous operation. It means it is going to take some time to complete. So we call this response.json, and we put this await keyword again, which basically says that I'll wait until the promise is resolved or rejected, and if it's resolved, I'll store this in data. And then once this is executed, line number 479, we are damn sure that we get the data inside this variable. There's one catch here, like there's one catch, and that is what if some error happens, then we are not going to get the data. Okay, so I'll also tell you after this how you can handle that. So, but if error doesn't happen, then we are damn sure that we are going to have this data here. And then I'm just doing that data.results.map, and all this stuff here. Okay, so I hope this is clear. Now, let's say that as I told you, there can be a problem while fetching an array, maybe some error or something. We are not able to reach the resource. Now, how do you come to know that, and how do you basically stop the further execution? For example, let's say based on this data, you have here 15 to 20 lines, but you know that once this line number 480 returns an error, there's no point in executing those 15 lines. And let's say there are some CPU intensive work, some compression or whatever, but they are eventually going to give you an error. So why not exit out of that complete thing? So we have a try catch block, which is used for error handling. So I'll say that try out this code. I'll say the compiler or interpreter, whatever it is, that please try out this code. And if this runs properly, then I don't have any problem. But if it doesn't run properly, so I insert this catch statement here, which is going to catch all the errors, and it is going to store all the errors in this, not all the errors, you can say the first encountered error, and this is going to store this in like this. It is going to store the error in this error variable, and then you can console.error here in the error itself. Okay, it's a lot of error. Let's change the name to ERR or whatever. So if it runs properly, then you won't see anything happening. But let's create an error. If it's very easy to create an error, no? So let data equals to sum this. Okay, I'll save this. You'll see, okay, identifier data has already been declared. So this is not executed. And let's say, how do I know that this thing is doing all this stuff? Console.log. This is running. So, sorry, it was a small mistake. So the mistake was that this is actually something which is a core error. Make sure whether I'm doing something wrong or not. Okay. So basically, like, this is something which is not meant to be try catch thing, because you can't really even try to replace an already declared identifier. So like, that's a good point to note. So maybe one more error would be, okay, change the name something random, and now if I run, this is not returning an error. Okay, it did return an error. If you see that it did return an error, who ASD and something. So like, yeah. So it is returned error. So there was a problem which has failed to fetch, and hence it returned me an error. Okay, so in that case, okay, now I also understood one more thing, that why this was happening, because this was like a synchronous operation. So this was executed first, and hence this was a core error. So we get that error. But if I write a wrong URL or something, then this is going to eventually give me an error, which was this. So you know that if you want to exit out, you can exit out of that state. Yeah, any more things? Okay, cool. I'll hand it over to Krishna.
Thank you, Haridarshan. Hello, guys. So thank you for listening. Thank you for continuing with us in this 5 days workshop series. So this was the last day of this series, and as we have already announced, so we have organized the workshop on React. We all know that as you guys have learned the basics of JavaScript, and you must explore the React. We have organized the workshop on React by industry professionals. So we have provided the link in the description. also in the description of our social media handles and also in the chat box. So do register for it. So the workshop will be taken by the one industry professional, Mr. Rizwan Khan, who is currently working in the Paytm, and he is the front-end expert also. So we all know that the React is very trending these days, and also React is very popular. So everyone must give a watch to this workshop and start their journey with the React. So thank you. I will hand over to Kushi. Also, do attempt the quiz. The quiz link is also shared in the Discord channel as well as in the chat box. So ask us anything in our Discord. Also, do follow us on our social media handles to stay updated about the latest events about organized by Rait Acm. I will like to hand over to Anushka.
The key to pursuing excellence is to embrace an organic long-term learning process and not to live in a shell of static, safe mediocrity. Usually, growth comes at the expense of previous comfort or safety. On this note, we would like to conclude today's session by expressing our heartfelt gratitude towards our expert for honoring us with his precious time. Thank you, sir, for enlightening us with all the valuable knowledge and information. I would like to express my gratitude to Principal of RAIT, Dr. Mukesh Patil, sir, and HOD of IT Department, Dr. Ashish Jadhav, sir. A heartfelt thanks to all the participants for tuning in and keeping the session interactive for all the days. We hope you enjoyed today's session. Do not forget to attend the quiz before leaving. We have put the link to it in the text tab. Do follow us on Instagram to get updates about further events. For further updates, follow us on our social media handles. Link to the same has been put in a text channel too. Certificates will be provided by the mail. Till then, keep learning and keep coding. Thank you.